All right, strap in everyone for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We're going deep into the world of research design. Specifically, we're going to be talking about field experiments.
That's right.
And we're using this university-level course document as our guide.
Okay.
We're going to figure out how researchers actually study stuff we care about, like,
Right.
Real life, not just in some lab.
Exactly. It's like this.
Yeah.
Imagine you're trying to figure out if a new teaching method actually works, helps students learn better.
Yeah.
A field experiment lets you test that out in an actual classroom,
Yeah.
not just some, sterile lab environment.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get into the whole field part,
Yeah.
let's start with the basics. Like, what is experimental research?
Well, think of it like a detective story.
Right.
Experimental research is all about finding clues to see if one thing causes another.
Okay.
So researchers carefully tweak certain things.
Right.
We call these variables, while keeping everything else the same.
Yeah.
That way they can see if those tweaks actually make a difference in the outcome.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do you even do that out in the real world?
Right.
Like, how much can you really control when you're dealing with, I don't know, a bunch of rowdy teenagers?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That's where field experiments get really interesting.
Okay.
They take that same detective mindset,
Yeah.
looking for cause and effect,
Uh-huh.
but they do it out in the wild where things are definitely more unpredictable.
Okay, so it's like comparing a perfectly organized crime scene on TV to, actual detective work.
Yeah, and our source material uses a great example to show this.
Okay.
They talk about comparing two different ways of teaching.
Okay.
The traditional lecture style versus a more interactive, hands-on approach.
Yeah.
A field experiment would let you see how those methods actually play out with real students in a real classroom.
Yeah, that's so much cooler than, just reading about teaching theories. You get to see the actual impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest strengths of field experiments is that they can give us insights that have real-world implications.
Right.
But of course, there's a trade-off.
Uh-oh. What's the catch?
Well, when you're out in the real world, you can't control everything.
Right.
Think of all the things that could affect how students learn.
Yeah, like what?
Their mood that day. What they had for breakfast.
Okay.
Whether the classroom's too hot or too cold.
Oh, yeah, I can see how that would get messy fast.
Right. And our source even mentions things like the researcher's own attitude.
Oh, wow.
Potentially affecting the results.
Interesting.
It's a reminder that even the people conducting the experiment can unintentionally influence what happens.
Whoa, so it's like the detective's own biases could, accidentally contaminate the evidence.
That's a wild thought.
That is a wild thought.
It is.
Okay, so let's talk about that. How do you actually build a solid field experiment? Is there a special toolkit they use or something?
Think of it more like a blueprint.
Okay.
Our source breaks it down into 6 key steps.
Okay.
First, you got to figure out exactly what you're trying to solve or understand.
Right.
That's defining your research question.
So, does this new teaching method actually improve student learning?
Exactly. Then comes picking your sample.
Oh, right.
Which is just a fancy way of saying the group of people you'll be studying.
Okay.
This is where things like random sampling come in.
Yeah.
Which basically means making sure your group is a good representation of the bigger population you're interested in.
So, if you're studying high school students, you don't want to just pick the brainiacs or the troublemakers.
Right.
You want a good mix of everyone.
Spot on.
Yeah.
And once you've got your sample, it's time to design the study itself.
Okay.
Figuring out what you'll be tweaking, how you'll measure the effects, and what tools you'll use to gather your data.
Okay, so that's where things get really hands-on. You're putting the detective work into action.
Exactly. And our source walks through all of this using that teaching method example.
Oh, nice.
Which is super helpful.
Yeah.
It's like they're giving you a behind-the-scenes look at how a real field experiment is put together.
So it's not just theory. We're getting practical stuff, too.
Precisely.
I like it.
And speaking of the big picture, this brings us to research design.
Okay.
Basically, the master plan that guides the entire experiment.
Okay.
It helps ensure that you get accurate and meaningful results.
Okay.
Not just a bunch of random data.
Right, because even detectives need a plan. You can't just, barge into a crime scene and start randomly dusting for fingerprints.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a good research design helps control for all those pesky extraneous variables we were talking about earlier, all the things that could accidentally mess with your results.
Right, so it's like building in safeguards to make sure your detective work is actually leading you to the right culprit?
Exactly. Now, within this whole research design thing,
Yeah.
there are different types of designs,
Okay.
each with its own strengths and weaknesses.
Ooh, okay. This sounds like where things could get complicated.
Don't worry, we'll break it down.
Okay.
Our source highlights 3 main categories.
Right.
Single-case designs,
Okay.
quasi-experimental designs,
Okay.
and experimental designs.
Gotcha.
And understanding these is like having different tools in your detective kit.
Okay, so I'm picturing like a magnifying glass,
Oh.
a fingerprint dusting kit,
Hi.
and like maybe some high-tech laser scanner.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Each tool is good for different situations.
Right.
Single-case designs are like that magnifying glass.
Okay.
They let you zoom in and study one person or a very small group in detail.
Okay.
It's great for specific cases, but it doesn't always tell you about the bigger picture.
Right, so maybe not the best for cracking a citywide crime ring,
Exactly.
but good for figuring out why a specific suspect acted the way they did.
Exactly. Then we have quasi-experimental designs, which are
yeah.
more common in field experiments, especially when you can't control every little detail.
Okay.
It's like working with the evidence you have at a crime scene,
Yeah.
even if it's not perfectly pristine.
Right, so a bit more realistic, a bit more messy, but still super valuable.
Exactly. And our source points out that quasi-experiments can give us a lot of insight into real-life situations,
Yeah.
even if they're not as controlled as a lab setting.
Right.
And finally, we have experimental designs,
Okay.
which aim for the highest level of control, like those perfectly staged crime scenes on TV.
So this is where we get back to the scientist in the lab, meticulously controlling every variable.
Precisely.
Okay.
And within this category, there are even more specialized types,
Oh, boy.
like the between subjects and within subjects designs, and even ones with fancy names, like the Solomon foregroup and factorial designs.
Whoa. Okay, that's a lot to unpack.
I know, right?
Maybe we can save those subtypes for another deep dive sometime.
Definitely.
Okay.
But for now,
Yeah.
let's stick with the 3 main types.
Okay.
So we have single case for deep individual insights,
Okay.
quasi-experimental for real-world relevance, and experimental for maximum control in the lab.
All right, I think I'm starting to get the hang of this.
Good.
So, are there any limitations mentioned for experimental designs?
Excellent question.
Yeah.
You see, even though they aim for the most control,
Right.
experimental designs aren't always the best fit,
Okay.
especially when dealing with something as complex and unpredictable as human behavior.
Right.
You can't always recreate the messiness of real life in a lab setting,
Right.
no matter how hard you try.
Right, because sometimes the most interesting stuff happens outside the lines, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where the expertise of the researcher really comes in.
Yeah.
They have to carefully consider the research question, the resources available, and choose the best approach for the situation.
So it's not just about following a recipe. It's about understanding the nuances of each design and making informed decisions.
Precisely. And that's what makes research design such a fascinating and ever-evolving field.
Wow.
It's about constantly evaluating and refining your approach to get the most meaningful and insightful results.
Well said. And before we move on, is there anything else in the source material that really jumped out at you?
You know what I found particularly fascinating? The whole idea of controlling for variance.
Okay.
It's like when you're looking at your data,
Yeah.
you need to be able to separate the signal from the noise,
Okay.
figuring out which differences are actually meaningful
Right.
and which are just random fluctuations.
So it's like our detective is trying to figure out if a fingerprint actually belongs to the culprit or if it's just from someone who like accidentally bumped into the doorknob.
Exactly. And having a strong grasp of research design gives you the tools and knowledge to do that no matter what field you're in.
All right, deep divers. Let's take a moment to regroup before we move on to the next phase of our exploration. What have we learned so far?
We've uncovered the basics of experimental research.
Yes.
It's all about investigating cause and effect. We've explored the difference between lab experiments, which happen in controlled environments, and field experiments, which take place in the real world. And we've delved into the 6 key steps involved in constructing a solid field experiment,
Right.
from defining the research question to choosing your sample.
And we've started to peek into the world of research design,
Yes.
which acts as the blueprint for generating accurate and meaningful results.
Plus, we've begun exploring the 3 main types of experimental designs:
Right.
single case, quasi-experimental, and experimental.
But wait, there's more. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll be taking a closer look at those experimental design subtypes,
Yes.
unpacking their specific uses and limitations.
We'll also be looking into some of the real-world challenges researchers face when conducting field experiments.
Ooh, exciting.
Get ready for some serious detective work.
Stay with us, deep divers. The journey continues.
It does. Welcome back, deep divers.
Yep.
Ready to unpack some of those more intricate experimental designs?
Oh, absolutely. I'm especially curious about those fancy-sounding ones.
Yes.
Like the Solomon foregroup and factorial designs. They sound like something out of a spy movie.
Well, they might not involve secret agents,
Right.
but they are pretty clever tools for researchers.
Mm.
Let's start with the Solomon foregroup design.
Okay.
It's like a souped-up version of the classic pre-test, post-test design, but with a twist.
Okay, remind me. What was the pre-test, post-test thing again?
Imagine you're trying to figure out if a new training program improves employee performance.
Okay.
You'd give a test to 2 groups of employees before the training. That's the pre-test.
Okay.
One group gets the training, the other doesn't.
Right.
Then you test them again after the training, the post-test.
Gotcha.
The idea is to see if the training group improved more than the group that didn't get the training.
Right, so you're looking for a bigger jump in scores for the group that got the special training.
Exactly. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes just taking that first test can actually influence how people perform on the second test.
Oh.
Like if you know you're being tested on something,
Yeah.
you might start paying more attention to it, even without the training.
Ah, that makes sense. So the pretest itself could be messing with the results.
Precisely. And that's where the Solomon foregroup design comes in handy.
Okay.
It adds 2 more groups to the mix.
Okay.
One group gets the training, but no pretest,
Okay.
and the other group gets neither the training nor the pretest.
Okay, so we have a group that gets both tests and the training.
Right.
A group that gets both tests but no training.
Mm-hmm.
A group that gets the training but only the post-test.
Yes.
And a group that only gets the post-test. Wow, that's a lot of groups.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But by comparing the results across all 4 groups,
Yeah.
researchers can really isolate the effects of the training itself.
Right.
They can tell whether it truly made a difference or if the pretest was throwing things off.
So it's like having extra checks and balances to make sure your conclusions are rock solid.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears to factorial designs,
Okay.
which are all about studying the effects of multiple things at once.
Okay.
Imagine our training program example.
Yeah.
Maybe we want to see how the training works for different departments in the company.
So instead of just looking at the training itself,
Right.
we're adding another layer. Like, does it work better for the sales team versus the marketing team?
Exactly. And the cool thing about factorial designs
Yeah.
is they let you see not only how each thing affects performance on its own,
Right.
but also how they interact with each other.
Oh, interesting. So maybe the training works great for the sales team, but not so much for marketing.
Precisely. It's like looking at a puzzle with multiple pieces.
Yeah.
You get a much richer understanding of the whole picture
Right.
than if you just looked at each piece in isolation.
These designs sound super powerful.
They are.
But our source material also talks about some real-world challenges that come with field experiments.
Yes.
Even with these clever designs.
Right. Remember those extraneous variables we talked about?
Uh-huh.
All those things you can't perfectly control in a real-world setting.
Yeah.
They're always lurking in the background.
It's like trying to bake a cake perfectly, but someone keeps fiddling with the oven temperature and sneaking in extra ingredients.
Exactly. And in research, those extra ingredients can be things like individual differences between people,
Right.
social influences,
Yeah.
even something as simple as the weather on a particular day.
Wow.
All of these things can affect your results in ways that are hard to predict or account for.
So how do researchers even deal with that?
Right.
Do they just throw up their hands and say, I guess we'll never know for sure?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
It all comes down to careful planning and really meticulous methods. Our source emphasizes being super clear about your research question, choosing a representative sample, and using the right tools and analyses for your data.
So it's like before you set sail on an expedition,
Yeah,
you make sure your ship is seaworthy and your crew knows what they're doing.
precisely. And even then, you have to be prepared for the unexpected.
Right.
Field experiments often demand flexibility and adaptability.
Yeah.
You might have to adjust your plans on the fly if something unforeseen happens.
It sounds like researchers need to be equal parts scientist,
Yes.
detective, and improvisational artist.
I like that. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to bring up something that's crucial to any type of research,
Okay.
especially when we're dealing with people,
Uh-huh.
ethical considerations.
Oh, right. Ethics. That's something we can't overlook,
Exactly.
especially when we're talking about potentially impacting people's lives.
Absolutely. Things like getting informed consent from participants,
Right.
making sure their information is kept confidential, and minimizing any potential risks. These are all essential for ethical research.
Yeah.
And when you're working with people in their natural settings,
Right.
these considerations become even more important.
It's a good reminder that research isn't just about collecting data.
Right.
It's about treating people with respect
Right.
and doing things the right way.
Exactly. And that includes being open about how we conduct our research,
Yeah.
acknowledging any limitations of our findings,
Right.
and ultimately using our knowledge to benefit society in a meaningful way.
Well said. I think that's a perfect place to pause for a moment.
Okay.
We've delved into some pretty complex experimental designs,
Mm-hmm.
looked at the challenges of real-world research,
Yes.
and touched on the vital importance of ethical considerations.
And in our final segment,
Yeah.
we'll bring all of this together and leave you with some thought-provoking questions to ponder
Okay.
as you continue your own exploration of research design.
Stay tuned, deep divers. The adventure continues.
Mm.
Okay, so, deep divers, we're back for the final part of our journey. Yes.
Into the world of research design. And we've
covered a lot.
we have covered a lot of ground, from the basics of experiments to those
That was really fancy.
super clever designs that researchers use to, like,
You're really?
tease apart cause and effect.
Yeah, yeah.
We've even looked at some of the challenges of actually doing research in the real world,
Right.
where things aren't always as
That's nice and neat.
controlled as in a lab.
Yes, exactly.
It's been quite an adventure.
It has.
But before we wrap up,
Okay.
curious,
Yeah.
what's the big takeaway here?
I think the biggest takeaway is just how powerful field experiments can be.
Okay.
They give us a way to study real-life situations
Mm-hmm.
and get insights that can actually make a difference in the world.
So instead of just theorizing about how things work,
Right.
we're actually getting out there and seeing it in action?
Exactly.
Yeah. While there are definitely challenges to doing this kind of research in the real world,
Right.
they're not insurmountable.
Right.
By using those rigorous methods,
Mm-hmm.
being flexible and adaptable,
Right.
always keeping ethical considerations top of mind,
Yes.
we can really unlock a ton of knowledge about the world around us.
It's like being an explorer, venturing into uncharted territory.
Yeah.
But equipped with
The best tool.
the best tools.
Yeah.
A strong sense of what's right and wrong.
A good compass.
Yeah, a good compass. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of uncharted territory,
Yeah.
our source material leaves us with a very thought-provoking question.
Ooh. I like those.
Given the trade-offs between having a lot of control in that lab setting
Right.
versus capturing the messiness of real life,
Mm-hmm.
how do researchers decide when a field experiment is the best approach?
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
Like choosing the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
Recognizing that no one approach is going to be perfect for every situation.
Exactly.
Hi.
Sometimes a tightly controlled lab experiment is the best way to isolate a specific variable and really test a very specific idea.
All right.
Other times, a quasi-experimental design, which really embraces the complexity of the real world, might be more appropriate.
And sometimes a deep dive into a single case can reveal things that you wouldn't get from larger groups.
Right.
It all depends on the research question,
Exactly.
the resources you have,
Yes.
and of course the ethical considerations.
It all factors in.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's up to the researcher to weigh these factors carefully
Yeah.
and make the best decision for their particular research question.
Absolutely.
It's all part of the process.
It is well said.
Thank you.
I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive
Yeah.
into the world of field experiments.
It really is.
We've really explored their strengths, their limitations,
You're doing it all.
and their incredible potential
Yeah.
for understanding human behavior
Absolutely.
in all its complexity.
Yeah. It's messy out there,
It is messy out there.
but that's what makes it fun.
It does, and hopefully we've sparked your curiosity to keep exploring this really fascinating field of research.
Definitely. There's always more to learn.
Absolutely. So until next time, deep divers.
Yes.
Keep asking those questions.
Keep learning.
Keep learning and
Yeah.
keep diving deeper into the world around you.
Absolutely. See you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Your support helps us keep creating valuable content like this. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Join our community for more insights into psychology and personal development. Let's grow and learn together. See you in the next video.